Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of City Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Jim McKenna, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council website, so the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City Plans Panel deals with applications from the city centre, as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receive. The aim of the panel is to hear all relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decisions. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have done so? Can I start on my left with Daljit, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daljit Singh. I lead the Central Area Planning Team.
Matthew Walker, City Centre Planning Team.
Good afternoon, I'm Lisa Brannan, Principal Engineer, Highways.
Good afternoon, it's Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanningley and I'm a member of this panel.
Hello and good afternoon, Councillor Asghar Khan, Councillor for Bermtos and Richmond Hill Ward. Dan, I've got yours.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carville, Carville and Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Annie Maloney, Beaton Holbeck Ward.
Good afternoon, Lewis Foote, and I'm doing the panel PowerPoint today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen from the Audley Ward. Get that long.
I'm not going to do a long one like you. Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, finally in Whately Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Arden Wharfdale.
Hello, everyone. I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Stephen Varley, Design Officer.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Amy Davis, Legal Services. And I'm Councillor Katie Dye from Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Thank you for that, members. Can I welcome back Councillor Blackburn? We haven't seen you for a number of weeks, and good to see you sat around the table again. I'm sure you'll have plenty to contribute. Okay, good to see you anyway. Moving on then, can we start at item number 1? Andy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there is no exempt information on today's agenda. Under item number 3, we have no late items. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask if any members have an interest to declare? I'll take that silence as a no. Moving on to agenda item number 5, we have no apologies for absence today, Chair.
Thank you for that, Andy. Can we then move on to item number 6, commencing on page 7, minutes of the meeting 15th of February 2024. Can I go through in my usual way? Page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, and finally page 14. Are there any matters arising? I take that as no. Can we move them as a true and correct record in that case? That's been moved. All those in favour? Yep. I take it as nobody against. Moving on then to agenda item number 7. Matt, are you ready to present, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall this item was deferred for one cycle to address concerns expressed by members on the single issue of the layout arrangement of a number of apartments in the scheme and their relationship to the national minimum space standards. Just a quick recap of the site initially. This is Hord Court. an almost triangular site located between Brick Street, Brussels Street and Duke Street. The application relates to a 10-storey building to host a co-living residential development of 118 apartments and their associated facilities. And then just to help set the scene again, here's a CGI of the view looking down Brick Street southwards, and members who were on the site visit last cycle will recall that this is approximately where we were stood to look at the development site. Now, at last month's meeting, members drew officers' attention to specifically two of the room formats in the scheme. The most concerning to members related to 4 of the proposed units at the top 2 floors. This slide shows the area of concern in that an uncomfortable extent of the layout was set out as thin corridor space. So I've marked that area on the plan that you can see on screen. So to resolve this, we've worked with the applicant over the past 3 weeks to produce a new layout for these units. I'll try and show that more clearly on the next slide. So the way this has been achieved is that the angle of the curved glass and the rooftop floors of the building has been slightly altered from what was shown last month. This allows for the creation of some additional floor space within the 2 units. And it's achieved by bringing the glazed wall in closer to the roof parapet. I tried to show the area where the change occurs in orange. Essentially, the curvature of the glass and the floor plate of the upper floors comes closer to those 2 corner areas there than it did previously. That then allows for some of the internal space to be handed back into the main building as corridor, but corridor outside of the private residence. The gross internal area slightly exceeds the 37 square metres to hit the space standard, and it meets the requirements in terms of the internal travel distances between the dwellings and the lift and the stair cores for fire reasons. Officers consider this resolves the issue raised by members last month without any subsequent discernible difference to the appearance of the building. Before I come to the matter of the remaining 16 apartments which were queried last month, the applicant has, at our request, provided some layout plans which detail internal storage provision for each of the units in the scheme. Again, the storage provision, as was expressed previously, will meet the National Minimum Space Standard, which, although it's not a strict requirement for co-living proposals, is considered positive and accords with the intention of our guidance note. So these are the lower floors, and then again at the upper floors. So as a starting point, and notwithstanding any of the occupier's own personal storage that they might wish to bring along to the unit, the layouts will allow for at least the very minimum requirements under the space standards. Now, the reason I've highlighted that specific point is with regard to the remaining 16 apartments, which we were asked to look again and reconsider. Now, this equates to 2 units per floor, as per the layouts that you can see. Members raised some concerns that an element of each of these units was again interpreted as being simply a corridor space and would not perhaps be active or usable space for an occupier. So just a little more explanation on why, in this case, we don't consider this to be as relevant to these 16 apartments shown on screen than the 4 that we've shown you at the roof level, where there was clearly an identified issue. Now, first of all, as set out in the report, the space standards do not differentiate corridor space as being in any way separate and distinct from the remaining floor area of a dwelling. Notwithstanding this, we're not here to apply a tick box assessment of the standards. We always undertake a qualitative assessment. So the slide on screen shows the layout and the location of storage as according to the space standards hatched in orange there. And the area you might consider to be corridor space is that area that's 1.3 to 1.4 metres in width and depth. And just to explain further here, we disregard that door swing area, so I've marked that in red. And then the next few slides show how that adjacent space could be used for additional storage or furniture. For reference, the depth of the hatched orange feature you'll see is 0.5 metres, and that would leave at least 800 millimetres between it and any adjacent wall, which is sufficient for an occupier to be able to walk past. So this is one option that would still allow pass and repass. Another option, and another option. And the point I'm trying to express here is that the corridor need not be dead space. It can provide additional storage for an occupier, an opportunity to personalise the space, and potentially, if so minded, it can allow an operator to provide a variety of different storage options to suit the bespoke requirements of the individual occupier. And just to help illustrate this point and put it into layman's terms, there's 3 examples of storage here. None of these exceed 400 millimetres depth. So all of these would fit into that space without adversely affecting the occupier's ability to manoeuvre around their studio apartment. Now, in the case of the 4 apartments at the top 2 levels, the layouts before revision did not lend themselves too well to that space being utilised in this sort of fashion. Hence the revision. However, in the case of these 16 apartments, we think we've demonstrated here how the space can be put to meaningful use, and it's not just simply a corridor space. So officers therefore consider that the space in the 16 apartments I've just shown you, which has been interpreted as being corridor, does not translate to being dead or unusable space. It allows for a variety of options of layouts and consumer choice. And furthermore, it meets the space standard, which, although itself is not a strict policy requirement for co-living proposals, is an obvious benefit. So we're satisfied that these 16 apartments would provide a suitable level of residential amenity for the occupier. Now, at Councillor Khan's request from the last meeting, the applicant has brought some material samples for you to consider. At this stage, these are just an indicator as the time to issue a decision and procurement and stock levels may see these materials vary outside of the applicant's control. However, that's one reason we use the conditions process to control this, and we would seek to work with the developer to find matches as close to what we're being shown at that appropriate juncture. And finally, just to update members regarding a very recent issue, a letter of comment and partial objection was received yesterday from Squire Patton Boggs on behalf of Watkins Jones Group. The letter clearly sets out that this is not an objection to residential use on the site, but requests the following be taken into account in your determination of the application and raises some points which we've considered and we can provide you a response to. The main thrust of the objection is an objection to the approach taken on the application of national minimum space standards and concerns regarding what precedent this will set for future co-living developments in the city. The letter sets out a tacit definition of the co-living model as being defined where shared communal living facilities are used to allow for smaller, individual, self-contained residential unit sizes to be accepted than would ordinarily be considered appropriate under national space standards. The letter challenges the approach we've taken with this application for seeking room sizes to be approximate to the national standards as far as can be achieved, and the requested revisions to a number of the units that I've just explained. And that's been interpreted as a determinative factor by the objector in how the authority is assessing co-living proposals. In response, our co-living guidance note, reporting to members and comments made clear at the last meeting by officers have made our position on this quite clear. Our guidance note makes clear that although not determinative, policy H9 and the national minimum space standards should not be considered irrelevant. Co-living schemes should not be considered against national space standards and our local policy H9 in a simple binary way. Officers have explained how our approach to co-living schemes is intended to work in accordance with the guidance note. The fact that larger unit sizes are proposed here does not automatically disregard them as being suitable for a co-living purpose. The letter sets out what the objector considers to be the characteristics of co-living accommodation. Now, this proposal at Hord Court is appearing to depart from that. However, in the same letter, it's also stated and accepted that there is no static or statutory definition of co-living. The objector's definition leads heavily upon a number of case precedents and the arrangement and ratios of private and shared accommodation as being the de facto method of reinforcing that definition. Mention is also made in the letter as to how the Greater London Authority have defined co-living in guidance associated with their local plan, making mention of a limited range of room sizes that can only be considered appropriate as co-living and using those physical constraints as barriers to the future use of this accommodation as general C3 accommodation. The letter essentially infers that room sizes above those limits can't be considered suitable for co-living. In response, this is one element of guidance, is what is essentially a national and local policy vacuum on the subject. And in Leeds, we've decided to take a different and more flexible approach. Our guidance note does not set such parameters. Our guidance suggests that we will seek to achieve individual units as close to the national space standards as possible, but this is not a strict requirement. Furthermore, there are other mechanisms beyond setting constraints of individual room sizes to ensure that an element of communal living commensurate with co-living use can be achieved and secured. In this case, we feel conditions requiring the retention of the communal living spaces and the submission of a management plan to be agreed and retained as operating practice in perpetuity will allow for assessment of the operator's management regime, processes and measures to encourage communal living, and that will set the appropriate boundaries to prevent the units in question falling into a C3 use class, and would also ensure the units and the shared spaces are utilised in concert with the private units to produce a co-living environment. As there is not a statutory definition of co-living, we consider the outcome of this approach is entirely appropriate. It doesn't unduly restrict developers from putting proposals forward which are of the nature of what we've got before us here, but likewise maintain the ability to aggregate shared and private spaces where that specific co-living product is more akin to those cases cited by the objector, and that we've seen come forward recently at other sites in Leeds. The letter also requests that we clarify the use class as being either C3 or sui generis in nature. Now, we consider this particular use to be sui generis because of the extent and nature of the communal living facilities being provided, particularly on each floor, and the reliance on only studio accommodation in conjunction with the management arrangements proposed to foster communal living. The letter also requests that we clarify the approach the council is going to take to the housing delivery test and how this development will be accounted for in reporting to central government in terms of the standard approach for C3 accommodation or the application of adjustments similar to example cases which, for example, involve student accommodation. Now, officers don't consider this particular issue to be a material consideration related to the determination of the application, but we do accept that a view will have to be taken by policy colleagues on this matter in due course to enable that appropriate reporting to central government. And finally, the letter requests we acknowledge the following. A, the development in question represents an approach to the NDSS, so the space standards, that is not a requirement of LCC planning policy. So in response, as I've explained, adherence to NDSS is not a requirement in co-living schemes, and each case will be addressed on its own merits as per our guidance note. B, the co-living units should be considered in the same light as student accommodation in terms of the application of policy H9. Well, in response, we don't think this is a precise comparison, and we would again draw the objector's attention to the approach that we've set out clearly in our guidance note, which addresses the approach this authority is going to take. C, the large size of the co-living units in this scheme represents a departure from other planned and operational co-living schemes in the UK. Well, in response, whilst the units in question are large in comparison to other built schemes, officers consider that this does not automatically mean they should be disregarded as being appropriate for co-living. And furthermore, there can be no foresight beyond the applications that have either moved through or are moving through the planning system nationally as to what the industry's intended direction of travel will be for this product in future, and how the planning system at both local and national levels will seek to fill that vacuum in national and local planning policy on the subject. And D, finally, the objector would like us to clarify that the co-living note is an accepted material consideration and application for a co-living development, that doubt may be cast on the weight to be applied to the note, but ultimately there is a vacuum due to the lack of local and national planning policy. And they consider that the co-living note should be accordingly be considered effectively a position paper on the part of the council for the application of planning policy. Well, our response to that is yes, we agree with that. We consider that that definition is entirely consistent with the approach that the planning authority is taking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. A lot to go through there, but very important. Can I invite members to ask questions of officers? Councillor Groom, please.
Sorry, could you just take us back to the first four that you showed us and just explain again the amendments that you've made to those? Would you mind?
Okay, so the area in red that you can see, that is, or as was presented to you last month, that was the area that caused the most concern, in that it was a lengthy extent of corridor with then an angle return into the dwelling. And as you can see, it's a fair proportion of the overall unit size. Now, the area to pay attention to here is as you look at let's take the bottom of the two units as you look at that plan. You can see the curvature of the elevation there, and you can see the angle of the parapet wall of the floors beneath. And the way that this has been addressed is effectively, and I'm sorry, they're not directly overlaid onto each other, so it's very difficult to actually show you a sort of quick flick between the two. But effectively, the extension has been enlarged, and the curvature, the angle of that glass has been changed to bring it closer to the parapet wall. And what that does is that wins an extra few square meters inside inside each of that unit and the other unit at the corner. There's some subsequent slight knock-on effects with the other units, but none of them reduce in size. And then what that's allowed us to do then is hand what was going to be the corridor space inside the dwelling to the outside of the dwelling. So the travel distance remains the same, so that for fire regulations, you're still effectively leaving the same spot in your property and getting to the lift in the same amount of time. But then you're not dealing with that awkward U-bend, and then effectively all of that unit is then essentially open plan. So that's the change there. Now, to the apartments that I showed you in regard to, and I know I've gone very granular with showing you shoe racks and such like, but there's no changes being made to those apartments. It was merely just an explanation of how we think the space can work, and it was probably not apparent in terms of how that space could use. Now, I think if we just go back here, I don't think that same rationale that we've applied to the other 16 apartments, I think it was quite right to, on reflection, to look at this again, because I don't think the same opportunities exist, mainly because of that awkward, that sort of L shape and the extent of corridor that would be there. So I think it was entirely right to look at that again.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Colin, please.
Well, it's not really a question. I was going to suggest we went and looked at the panels before we. Yeah.
It's a good idea. I meant to do that, and I think we should at this stage. And would members like to look at the sample panels, please? Where are they? Oh, they're all there. Hope you've had the opportunity to look at the bricks. Looks fine to me, nice fascinating. That's my opinion. I don't think there was any questions. May I move on to comments? There's a question. Okay, Colin, I'll put you in for comments. Okay, with that then, can we go on to comments, starting with Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Chair. Can I, as somebody who was somewhat grumpy last time, I know it's not in my nature, but you know, I think it's. But I think I need to put on record to say thank you to the developer for listening to what we said. And I think that's a plus. And I just wish more developers did the same thing. But I think we really need to say, you've gone away, you've thought about what we've said, you've come back with a set of suggestions that meet many of the issues that we had initially were concerned about. Just a couple of points. The discussion around storage, one of the points we picked up when we went to Manchester was that as you get older, you collect more stuff. And it may be, if it's possible, that you might look at somewhere in the communal area where you could create a storage space for, I don't know, large suitcases, etc. That's just a suggestion. You didn't mention the biodiversity net gain, but I'm hoping, because we've got an indication from the developer that they're prepared to make a contribution, that we can do something appropriate. I suppose it wouldn't be fair. I suppose we have to respond to the letter, which seems to me particularly negative, actually. You know, I suppose if I was a cynic, which of course I'm not, I might say this sounds like a developer who has a scheme somewhere in the pipeline and is somewhat concerned about the quality of this scheme. And it seems to me that none of their comments are really relevant to this particular development, in that the developers had a full discussion with us, has taken on board our guidance notes and has responded appropriately. I think also this is not the forum for us to make council policy in relation to this type of development. I would suggest, however, and I'm looking at the chair, that we may wish to discuss this at the development, that the points they make at the development plans panel, and in my case, I think reiterate our view that our guidelines, which we put together after some serious discussion, are the appropriate ones for Leeds. And I appreciate what they say about London, but this is not London. We do not have to do what London does. We have to do better. And this is better. So I have no qualms whatsoever in proposing we accept the recommendation.
I'll come back to that, but I take you're prepared to move the recommendation. Okay. And there's a seconder from Council Group. I'll come back to that. I think you're absolutely right. As you can see, neither David or John is here, so I'll ask Dalgia to take that message back, that we probably need further discussion on the proposals at Development Plans panel. I think that is a good thing. I'm not a cynic either, but I can't help saying that I disagree with anything you say, and I know from the nods around the table, a lot of the members do as well. Councillor Gruen.
I was just going to ask, and I'm sure it is the case, that we take a particular note of what's been suggested to go to Development Plans panel, so that I'm nudged in the right direction when the time comes and I look through the minutes. I would also like to agree with everything Councillor Campbell has said across the table, and add that it just goes to show deferring something for a cycle might feel a bit tedious at the time, but is really worth it in terms of the difference it can make.
Can I ask if you're prepared to second it, Councillor Gruen?
Yes.
You are. Thank you. Okay, I think your last point was very salient point, very important, that sometimes deferral, particularly with a new application. This is the first time we've dealt with co-living, and I think we have to get it right, or as right as we can get it, because this is going to set the standard for future applications, and we know there is a lot in the pipeline. So members around the panel, we're absolutely right for deferring it for clarity, and I think we've achieved that. Can we go on to the vote? Unless anybody desperately wants to speak? No. Okay. All those in favour then please show, and I'm happy to put my hand up. I won't ask for abstentions, amendments. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Well done, Matthew, indeed. A minute. Okay, can I introduce Tim? Seems a while since I've seen you at a panel. Welcome back. When you're ready to, please begin, Tim.
Thanks very much, Chair. I promise we've been working very hard on some really important schemes. So I'm very pleased to be able to bring this one in front of Plans Panel members today. This is an outline planning application for the demolition of the existing substation, creation of a mixed-use multi-level development comprising residential, which would be built to rent, commercial space, which could be offices or leisure, hotel, and a travel hub. All matters are reserved except in relation to access into the site. So some members were on site this morning, and some members might recall being on site a couple of years ago when the pre-application presentation came in front of members. Hopefully you can see the red line round about the site. On the northern edge, the Sweet Street. On the eastern side, Meadow Road. The southern edge onto Jack Lane. On the western side onto Bowling Green Terrace. Just in relation to what's there at the moment, in the northeast corner of the site, there's the Holfords building, and in the centre of the site, an existing substation. To the south, the routes down into the Holbeck area. To the west, beyond Marshall Street, the land south of Sweet Street, which members considered a few panels ago and is now has started commencement of development on that site, and moving north of Sweet Street into the Temple area with places like Temple Works and the conservation area in that part of the city. So some shots around the site. This is looking southwards at the junction of Sweet Street and Meadow Road, the Holfords building, as I mentioned, in the northeast corner of the site. This is going down Meadow Road, looking back towards the city centre. The site is on the left-hand side behind the hoardings and the advertising hoardings. We've moved on to Jack Lane now in the southwest corner of the site at its junction with Bowling Green Terrace. And the site is located effectively between the gap in the trees that you see on that frontage. But looking through that gap takes you to a view of the site on the southern side of Trent Street and the substation, which is cleared land. Trent Street is a road that runs through the middle of the site. It's a dead end, but provides access to electricity substation, large building with some palisade fencing and other measures to stop people getting into it. And then looking north from Trent Street across, again, cleared land. Those buildings you see in the background, they're on the north side of Sweet Street, just in relation to what there is at the moment. There's the Pinyard Apartments on the left-hand side, Holiday House, which is the white building occupied by Jet2, Leodis building built by Dandaro's Apartments, the yellow coloured building, and on the right-hand edge, lateral offices, which are government offices. And a view just along Sweet Street, looking towards the east of the site. Those buildings I was just referring to on the left-hand side of the image, and on the right-hand side of the photograph, a series of trees, and those are part of the green corridor recognised in the Holbeck neighbourhood plan, and also TPO'd as part of this scheme. So the site itself if you can see the red outline again in the centre of those isochromes is located in a pivotal location in relation to both the approach to the city centre from vehicle routes, but also in terms of its connections back to the communities to the south. And the site's been referred to over a series of years as being appropriate for all sorts of mixed-use developments of a variety of types. And this is one part of the unitary development plan. It's actually an extract taken from the Tall Buildings Design Guide. At that stage, we identified as a city 4 prestige development areas around the site or around the city centre. And the City 1 site sits on the western edge of the southern prestige development area. Then in the Tall Buildings SPD 2012, the site sits on the edge of an opportunity area for a cluster of tall buildings. And this is an extract from the Holbeck Neighbourhood Plan. The site's in the northeast or eastern edge of the plan area and is identified for mixed-use development and recognises the green corridor going along the Sweet Street boundary, but also an aspiration to introduce a green route through the site. Partly as a consequence of those policies, but in relation to what has previously been considered on the site, there have been 2 outline planning applications approved historically. 2004 application approved in 2006. The site wasn't quite as extensive as now proposed, but included comprehensive development across the entirety of the site. A similar mix of uses to that proposed now, other than it also included a casino at the time. As you'll note, there's also a reference in that permission to a 40-storey building. And similarly, the 2010 planning application, which is on the bottom of the screen, that references the same site area that we now considering, and again includes a mix of uses and buildings up to 40 stories in height. Back in February 2022, a scheme came, or the pre-application scheme was presented to members. There was quite a bit of discussion about that at the time, but I think the main essence of the discussion, and the full minutes are included as appendix in the report. The essence of the discussion was that the spaces were too fragmented in relation to the scale of development, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the desirability of bringing some of those spaces together to create bigger spaces that would work better with the scale of development. Excuse me. This is a diagram taken from one of the documents submitted with the planning application, and it really reflects the primary principles which the developer's taken on board in relation to formulating the current proposals. I think the large screen behind you doesn't show the colours very clearly, but hopefully if you can see a smaller screen, it focused around a large square in the centre or close to the centre of the development, and around that there would be a series of development zones which would be dissected by a series of routes which would connect and interconnect with surrounding streets. I'll jump back one. So the outline planning application is supported by a series of parameter plans which will, along with a development schedule and the design code document, be approved documents which will set the framework for the reserved matters which will come forward at a later date, and those elements will come in front of panel when those detailed designs have come forward. So on this diagram, it's shown constraints to development. Across the top of the site, there's a group or a line of TPO trees, and immediately south of that, going east-west across the northern edge of the site, a high-pressure gas pipeline. There's another high-pressure gas pipeline on or close to the southeast corner of the site, and that influences where buildings can actually be constructed. Likewise, on the western edge, the blue colour is a reference to a Yorkshire water easement. And we've mentioned before the substation, which is shown in the photographs. There's a desire for that part of the site to be developed, but the scheme that's been put together allows for an option of the substation remaining if it's not possible to relocate it somewhere, or indeed for it to be redeveloped. So this is one of the parameter plans which sets out the minimum areas of public realm, and beyond that, coloured in green, areas where buildings could be constructed, development zones 1 to 4. So the various dimensions marked on that diagram, which, as I say, sets the minimum parameters for the spaces in between buildings. Shaded within some of the green development zone areas are also indications where there would need to be breaks between or within those development zones. So, for instance, within development zone 4 on the right-hand edge, there could be potentially one break in the building on that side of the development, or possibly 2. Referencing back to the scale of the central square, which I didn't draw very much attention to given its importance in the scheme, and I'll just do that just for reference. The minimum dimensions of the space are 116 metres by 50 metres at its western edge. This is a significant and city scale size space. Now, relating that back to some of the spaces that we're all familiar with, Park Square, for instance, is 105 metres from edge to edge in relation to the green space, and 60 metres across. So in essence, the main square within the City 1 development would be a larger space than within City 1 within Park Square. Moving forward through the parameters, this shows the horizontal potential deviation in the building line around and about the development. You see the minimum dimensions in relation to the areas of public realm are still referenced, but where the light blue shading is on the diagram on the smaller screens at least, it shows the tolerances by which the building lines could move. Primarily, those could move inwards by 10 metres, but there is flexibility within the parameters, which does allow in some instances for the buildings to move basically in or out. Now, if the buildings were to move out, for instance, you would still end up with the minimum distances between the neighbouring building, and that's allowed for by the variation and the flexibility within the building lines on neighbouring buildings. This diagram references different scales of building that are potentially allowed by the development. The more intense orange colours are the taller buildings, and conversely the lighter tones are for smaller buildings. Now, the large, just to draw your attention to it, the larger buildings essentially in the centre of the site, if the substation were to be developed, to the north of the site, to the north of the substation, and also in the middle of what's referred to as DZ1. So potentially 3 tall buildings with the site. Within the site, those buildings could be up between 35 and 45 stories in height, whereas surrounding buildings would be more moderate and better related to surrounding development. This parameter plan indicates the types of uses that are possible within the different development zones, and also identifies the main active frontages around the site. So there's a small table which you won't be able to read the detail of in the bottom right-hand corner of the diagram, but that gives you an indication of the different types of uses that could fit within each of the zones. DZ1B, for instance, could only be used primarily as a residential development, albeit there could be commercial uses at ground floor level. the rest of the buildings could be used for a variety of uses, albeit there's no potential for residential use within DZ4, which abuts Meadow Road. As I mentioned at the outset, the outline application is made with all matters reserved other than for in relation to access around the site. There will be 3 approved highway drawings as it stands, and they show different scenarios depending upon whether or not any wind mitigation is required on the northern edge of the site, on the northern side of Sweet Street. Sorry. But what you can see around the site in relation to the green lines, those are new segregated cycleways around the site, footways of desirable 3 metre widths, I think pretty much around the entirety of the development. And also the blue lines identify principal entrance points for pedestrians into the site, in addition to the main vehicular access points, which are the darker grey areas. And there are 3 areas coming off Sweet Street, and on the southwestern side, two potential routes off Bowling Green Terrace, and also a route leading north of Bowling Green Terrace across Trent Street. And this is one of the highway drawings which we've been considering. What that shows in terms of the difference between the previous one is essentially widening of Sweet Street if a highway scheme comes forward requiring that widening. The parameter plans and the design code document, which we'll come on to, are also supported by a development schedule which sets out the overall framework in relation to the amount of development of different types of uses that could come forward. The types of uses are mentioned on the left-hand side of the table, but critically, the reference in the yellow line across the bottom outlines the maximum development. It's not possible for all the developments floor space to be built out, so it provides some flexibility for the developer in relation to how much residential and how much office space, etc., would come forward as part of the as part of the reserved matter scheme. I've mentioned the design code document a few times. It's a critical document which helps to and does indeed set the guidelines in relation to the design of spaces and the design of buildings to ensure thorough and rigorous approach to design and get the level of quality that we're wishing to see. The document extends to 110 pages. I don't intend to show you all of that today. There's a lot of it. It's extremely comprehensive and thorough. I'll just flick through a few of the pages of the document to give you a flavour of what's included. So this is part of the document which refers to the location of tall buildings, the footprint of the buildings, where they might sit within development zones, and the shape of those. On the bottom of the page, it gives some indication as to how those tall buildings might be distributed, and it gives some logical approaches to where you would put tall buildings essentially, and what they would look like. This image gives you an indication that considerations being given to the design in relation to the character of the buildings and the family of aesthetics that might come forward, grouping different types of buildings together. Some detailed principles in relation to building design, both with reference to materiality, classical architecture in relation to base, middle and top, and further typical information that you'd expect to see as part of such studies. Portions of fenestration, the way in which ground floors could be articulated, and further information in relation to the form and appearance of design of tall buildings as they come forward. There's a section in relation to building design for the residential element of the scheme, and equally in relation to the office elements of the scheme. The text alongside these precedent images helps to set and guides the detailed reserve matters that will come forward at a later date. Section in relation to the public realm and the design of the public realm. We've mentioned how large it is, but it's important that we get the detail of that right as well. And the design code document sets those details out and sets those principles in place, which would be an approved document. Just reference on this diagram, I think members at the pre-application stage questioned the provision of play within development, and we've talked about how large City One Square would be, and there's a requirement that play forms part of this development, which might well include quite a lot of apartments, and there are areas of play along the southern edge of that square and areas for more formal play on the western side of the City One Square, and looking at the top left-hand diagram. And further to that, the document goes into a lot of detail in relation to the design of individual zones within the development. So this is an extract in relation to Development Zone 1, which was the area of building at the top northern end of the site next to Sweet Street. And it gives you some indication in relation to how the architects at detailed design stage would consider the alignment of the frontages, the way in which those frontages will be animated, and also set some requirements in relation to routes through the building at a later stage. Drawing all those together, all those different elements, the parameters allow for quite a number of options to come forward, and this diagram just gives you an indication in relation to DZ1, the fact that there are at least 5 different ways in which the buildings could come forward, and indeed the different uses within those buildings could come forward. Reflecting that onto the wider site now, this gives an indication of 5 potential different approaches to a master plan for City One. The consistent element being the development zones, but also that central space. Given the variety of options, it's for illustrative purposes, it's been decided to bring forward and draw an illustrative master plan. There are two sketches here for you to see. One shows the proposal if the substation isn't developed. And you see the substation sitting beneath City One Square. And if the substation were to be developed at a later date. And this axometric is a very simple diagram, but just to give you an indication in relation to where those taller elements of building might sit, but also how the buildings would then reduce in height back down to the surrounding context. We've got to, sorry, just to finish, there's some illustrative sketches that have been put together. This is a drawing which would be or reflects a position if you were standing close to the main entrance of the site at the roundabout on Sweet Street, looking west along Sweet Street, and the main frontage of the development sitting obviously on the left hand side. On the left hand side of the image would be where the main route into the site would be located. This sketch shows an image of the location of where Holford's is essentially at the moment. So a building that would far better relate to the Clayton Hotel on the opposite side of the Sweet Street. On the left-hand side, the Meadow Road proposals for a new tree-lined edge to that street. Along Meadow Road, looking back into the site, you might remember on the highways drawing there were some blue arrows which gave an indication of routes into the site, and so this is one of those breaks in the building frontage, which would provide an opportunity for those people who wanted to go into the site from that location. And this is from the southeast corner, looking from, if you're approaching from the M61, essentially looking towards the site, looking northwards. The dotted line is the future if a building came forward on the substation site. It gives you an indication of the intended massing. Within the site, this location is viewed from the eastern edge of the park and gives an indication of how the substation might be screened if it were to be retained. And to finish on for now, CGI has been produced in relation to the main, most significant piece of the green space within the scheme, City One Square. We're viewing the square from the southwest corner, looking towards buildings which would be fronting Sweet Street, but as I say, fronting Sweet Street, they'd be set back at least 23 metres from Sweet Street edge. I'll leave it there in relation to the images. Just a couple of points in relation to my report. In relation to the section 106 element in the referred to in recommendation and later in the document, the cost of the city bike docking station provision is to be netted off the residential travel plan funds. That's been agreed with highway colleagues and the influencing travel behaviour team. And also the residential travel plan fund, it's given there is a maximum amount of money if all the dwellings came forward. But as we don't know how many dwellings will come forward, we'll change that to refer to amount per dwelling coming forward. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Tim. Brilliant. I can see there's an awful lot of work from yourself and the planning team to get it to this stage. I do remember that it's been around for a while. It seems to me to be rather interesting. I'll be certainly interested what members have to say. And we'll open that up now. There are no speakers against, but we do have the agent here, Andrew Windress, and the team. So if you feel the need, we shall call them forward to answer any questions that you might occur to you. And with that, can I invite members to ask questions, please? Hayley, is it your hand? I say yes.
I know, Dan, it's all right. Thank you. Appreciate that. So I can see in the papers there's some issues with wind potentially once this is built out. So I'd just like to have some more information around that, please. Like what areas would be impacted? Would any of those areas be green spaces? Like, because I'd just like to see it, please.
Thanks, Councillor. One of the reasons it's taken 2 years to get from the pre-application presentation to be in front of members today is because the applicant has thoroughly reviewed the wind implications of the development. There have been over 150 runs of CFD, computational fluid dynamic modelling of the scheme to try and work out the best approach to wind and wind mitigation. And also they've been in the wind tunnel for over 30 hours. What the wind studies found was that there are existing wind issues in localised positions on the north side of Sweet Street, close to Siddle Street Junction, Ingram Street Junction, and the developers worked hard to not only maintain that situation, not make it worse, but improve that scenario. Can you go to the image? So through all the wind studies that I've referred to, it's found that if the northern half of the site is developed, it's found that there's likely to be a need for some off-site wind mitigation, and the diagrams that you can see here indicate some proposals in relation to possibility of introducing some wind screens and wind totems. And as I say, the intent is not just to maintain a status quo, but potentially to reduce the existing wind issues that have been found. Having said all that, there's a potential that if sites come forward to the west of this site, or in relation to development proposals, those wind issues could actually disappear. Equally, each reserve matters application that comes forward that includes a built phase of development will need to be tested in relation to wind requirements at that stage, because as I mentioned several times, there's flexibility within the parameter plans, so we don't know precisely what buildings are and how big those are at this moment in time. But that will be fully detailed in further wind studies and wind tunnel testing as reserve matters applications come forward.
Tim, is that okay, Kelly?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And then just a quick follow-up. Where are residents going to go and have a picnic on a hot day?
I'm afraid, Councillor Brooks, I was going to say there, but there are a variety of spaces around the site. You might wish to go there, but equally areas of the site that I didn't refer to in very much detail. There are quieter spaces and locations which you could well access. There's a significant amount of green space that would be delivered by this development.
Thanks, Kaylee. Councillor Blackburn, please.
Thanks, Chair. Clearly, there's been a lot of work done, but we're a long way before we're going to see shovels in ground. And I just wondered, maybe developers can tell us this, when it's likely that when we're going to come and get proper applications, because as it stands at the moment, it doesn't tell you a lot here, does it? Apart from the principle of it. And I've got to say the principle of it seems sound, but how long?
Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. I think Lee Savage from Moda might be best placed to answer that question. I did put some commentary in the application that if this outline planning permission gets approval, there's an intent to start the enabling works on site very soon. And as they work through that, the intent to bring forward some designs in relation to the reserve matters, but over to Lee.
Thank you. Welcome, Lynn and Andrew. Please, when you're ready. You have, I imagine, heard the question, or would you like a repeat? Okay, continue.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good afternoon, everybody. The applicant, so should the committee accept the officer's recommendations, even before a permission is eventually granted, which obviously will be in the future should the committee follow the case officer's recommendations, the applicant is willing to invest in working up the detail and procuring the enabling works planning permission that is already permitted, if you recall, some years ago now, I think. That will take a significant amount of money to work that up and to tender it and to procure it. And with a fair wind, we hope to be on site this calendar year doing the enabling works. During that time, we're willing to twin track the working up and investing in the planning application for the first phase or phases of reserve matters, with the ultimate hope, that when the enabling works conclude, the works for the first phases can start. Our plan is that will be seamless. Obviously, that depends on a number of factors, such as reserve matters planning applications for one. But that is the plan, and that we thought was the most expedient way to deliver homes on this site. Thank you, Chair.
Is that okay? Now that we have the applicants and the architects here, any further questions to them? Annie, please.
Yeah, just a bit of clarity on the green corridor. So yeah, green corridor. Because Meadow Road and Jack Lane, they are very busy roads and very dusty roads because of how busy those roads are. So with like Councillor Brooks mentioning about where do people go for a picnic, with that going towards Holbeck Moor Road, so I presume it's to get from Holbeck Moor as a green space, the green space that's going to be part of the site. Just for a bit of clarity, how green and maintained that will be, because it is directly next to an incredibly busy road.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Andrew Price from Reform Landscape Architecture, been advising on the project. So yeah, the local green corridor identified in the enabler plan, this site will deliver part of that on the application site. As you said, there's some busy roads bounding the site on 3 of those sides. What we've done is created a master plan which has got multiple routes through it. As explained by Tim, it sets out in the parameter plans where those blocks need to be divided, but what we're establishing is a main route along and away from Jack Lane, so in behind the existing vegetation, the existing mature trees which along that road which will be retained, away from the road, and then through a legible route which connects in what is called in the application as Green Street North, which is a priority pedestrian area which also allows occasional vehicle use, but is substantially wide, 20 metres wide, for significant tree planting and other green infrastructure, which will then lead up through to Sweet Street. So while there is multiple routes through the site, both north, south and east, west, that is the main green corridor through the site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Annie, is that okay? I saw a hand up over on the right, but I didn't know. Wasn't Councillor Groon, anyway, while we decide on that.
I'm not sure who this is a question to, whether it's Tim or whether it's the developer or whether it's even Steve, but would somebody like to say a little bit more about the design code, which I understand is quite comprehensive and a lot of work has gone into it. How is that going to help us?
Yeah, I'll say a small bit, but I'll pass over to Kerry because Kerry is the author of the document, and I've seen a number of outline applications over the year which have been supported by similar types of documents, but nowhere have they been as comprehensive and thorough as this document. As mentioned, it goes to over 100 pages, and it's going to be interesting when we relate that to the reserved matters details and to ensure that all those principles that have been set in place within that are actually carried forward. So I don't know, Kerry, if you want to sort of encapsulate all that work.
Yeah, Kerry Buckley, Simpson Huff, architects on the scheme. So the design code is effectively a framework to help future architects, whether it be ourselves or other architects on the scheme, as a set of rules and principles in terms of architectural quality. And as Tim mentioned, things like window reveals and depths. So there's an element of a must, could and should within the design code. So there are elements that are kind of effectively deemed as policy if they're a must, and that is something that has to be delivered through the scheme of the RMAs. There's shoulds, which is recommended as strong guidance, and then there's coulds, which give future architects possibilities to look at alternative options. So we've worked with Tim on which ones are musts and shoulds to give a good framework for delivering that at the next stage. Does that answer your question?
It sounds very reassuring.
Good.
Thank you, Kerry. Any further questions? Can I ask one in between then? It's obviously a fairly long time span for this build out, and I know it depends on market conditions and many other things. But is there an idea how long it'll take? I mean, it's a great scheme, and well, it looks like a great scheme, but clearly it's going to take some years to build out the scheme.
Thanks, Chair. The obvious answer is we'd like to deliver it as quickly as we can. As you would, it's a great opportunity to deliver nearly 25% of Leeds City Centre housing requirements, and the vital jobs that will come with that. Realistically, possibly 8 to 10 years, depending on economic conditions. But we would like to bring forward the first phase or phases, and I keep saying phase or phases because that is our intention, not to just build one building, because if it is a large area. Common sense would say, well, can we bring a cluster together to help create a sense of place as early as possible, and improve the area and connect the other spaces around our site as well through those corridors that colleagues have already talked about. So in summary, as soon as practicable, probably 8 to 10 years realistically.
I guess it's the answer I expected, but I understand the complexity of these things. Katie, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in on the back of that question that if you have in mind a cluster or starting point, could you share that with us? And also, at what point does that beautiful green space become part of that? Is that going to come in early on in the proposals, or might it be a long wait for people who are early adopters of the space?
Wow, quite a tough one, because it does depend on the economic climate, and that green space, part of it is that the site is at 2 levels. Basically, there's a lower level, as you'll have seen on your visit, towards Sweet Street, and a higher level to the south of the site. And that part of that green space bridges that. So that green space hopefully will be delivered with buildings in whole or part A1, A2 and B that were on your plans earlier. If you want to look at them later, we have them here. If we can bring forward the buildings in that area as early as we can, that will have the best opportunity of placemaking. So that would be our aim, subject to all the conditions we've talked about. I'm happy to involve officers in the earliest thoughts about pre-application conversations on the reserve matters, which we will bring forward hopefully soon, depending on the results of this meeting.
Thank you, Lee. Any further questions? I see none. Always a good sign to you guys. Can we move on then? Can I first of all thank Kerry, Lee and Andrew, please, for coming forward and answering questions. It does seem to me very exciting. I probably won't be sat here when it's complete, but I shall be watching it. I'll see how it develops. A very important area to the city. So thank you for bringing us forward. Can we move on to comments now, please?
Really?
Who was it?
Your mic is on.
Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the comments that you've made, really, and say that I think there's a lot of potential in this scheme. And if it's well designed and well carried out, I think it will change that part of the city altogether. And it's really exciting to be at the beginning of a development like that. So given that we may hit problems and issues on the route, I think for as far as this application goes, I'd be happy to move it.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to accept that. Is there a seconder for it, please? Dan, I've seen your hand first. Okay, those all in favour, please show. Wow, unanimous. I have to say it's It looks a great scheme. It really looks a great scheme. It certainly got me excited, and I guess it's the first time I've seen it because I was in Dublin when I should have had a chair's brief, so I only saw it on Monday. But it is exciting. I know this area well. I used to live in Cherwell and travelled every day on it. It's been long overdue for development, and thank you for bringing us forward. I maybe jumping ahead 30, 40 years. I can see this scheme being listed. I really can see it being listed. So well done to Kerry and yourself for bringing it forward. And probably I've said too much on that, but great. Bring it back to us as soon as you can and share your exciting plans with us in more detail. Come in, Lee, please.
Thank you for those words, Chair. I'd just like to thank the hard work and dedication of the council officers as well. This has not been easy, as you pointed out. It has been quite complex, but their patience has been welcomed, and their hard work has been welcomed as well. We know that all those colleagues are very, very busy, so thank you to them.
Right, and you know, I feel that I want to clap you for this. So anybody who wants to join in, please. Thank you very much. Sorry, was that 5-minute comfort break? Okay.
Obviously got well.
Okay, members, can we resume, please? What's up? Okay, I'll try that one again. Can we resume, members? Okay, are we all ready to go? Jessica, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Jess Ashton, Principal Planner in the Central Team. So this is a full planning application to demolish and redevelop the site of the core shopping centre, providing a mixed-use scheme with commercial, retail and community uses at ground floor level and 807 student bed spaces above. It's an application from Tri-7 and Fusion students, which we received in August 2023, following a lengthy and in-depth pre-application process, which there was a close involvement from highways, conservation and design colleagues in particular, and it included a pre-application panel presentation in May 2023, as well as the applicant undertook a formal pre-application with Historic England, a presentation to the Civic Trust and a wider public consultation exercise. So it's a 0.65 hectare site, very centrally located at the heart of the city centre within the primary shopping quarter. The site's bounded by the Hedgerow in the north, Lands Lane in the east, King Charles Street in the west, and the southern boundary abuts buildings which front onto Albion Place. It's within a conservation area. There are a number of listed buildings in the vicinity, including the row of premises at the south, most of which are listed, and it includes the Grade 2-star Leeds Club premises. So the site's on the brow of a hill, and the land slopes significantly from west to east and also from north to south, with the result that there's in the region of a 6-metre level change from the highest point in the northwest corner to the lowest point in the southeast. It's currently occupied by the core, which is a Part 4, Part 3-storey shopping centre constructed in the 1980s in a postmodern style, but has been impacted by changing retail habits and as well as increased competition from nearby centres like Victoria Gate and Trinity. So it's suffering from high levels of vacancy, despite efforts over the years to reimagine the centre and diversify the offer. So the development proposal is for a collection of 3 buildings, buildings A, B and C, which occupy a similar footprint to that of the core, but they're separated by 2 new pedestrian streets, which reinstate a historic east-west connection through the site and helps to break up the mass and creates a more permeable, finer urban grain, which is characteristic of the city centre and that was lost during the redevelopment of the core. So building A in the north is the tallest building at 9 stories. It has a 6-storey main element. The floors 7 and 8 are within a mansard roof, and there's a glazed top story. Building B in the middle, 8 stories with a 5-storey main mass, a 6th floor that's set back in a brick setback, a mansard roof and a glazed top. And then building C at the south of the site is the smallest of the 3 at 7 stories. It's got a 5-storey main element and then a brick 6th floor setback, and the 7th floor is clad in a sort of quite a simple aluminium material. And the buildings are all linked at first floor level by two glazed lightweight bridge crossings. So this is just an elevation drawing. It's come out quite faint, but it allows that direct comparison. So it's here we're looking at the hedgerow elevation with the outline of the core overlaid onto the proposed development. So you can see that there is effectively the main body of the building is very similar to the existing building, and then the additional height is within 3 floors, but they're set back and set in. And here, looking at King Charles Street at the top and Lands Lane on the bottom, you can see how the scale of the buildings responds to the fall of the land, and that by the time you reach the south of the site, the scale is very similar to that of the existing building. So there's an additional, maybe 1 story, and that building C. And hopefully you can see how the new streets through break up the mass and provide that relief. And so I was reflecting that it's almost like the existing mass has been redistributed. So block A on the hedgerow, the principal and most prominent elevation, very classical and formal in appearance. I think it's very characteristic of Leeds. There is close attention to the architectural detailing with a dark bronze shop fronts and windows, and some carefully considered design that's gone into it. So for example, the way the curve reflects the curve of the Thornton buildings, and it's picked up on the arched heads to the windows at first floor level, and then that's repeated in some of the upper floors. So just the proposed elevations, and you can see the active frontages at ground floor level to help activate and animate the new pedestrian streets. And the building's in a sort of a horseshoe shape, which helps to break up the mass further. And then some bay studies to give a bit of a flavour of the attention to detail that's gone into the design of the scheme. So very significant deep reveals, decorative motifs, a sort of a white frame around the shop fronts and a decorative sort of pediment and string course across. A further bay study, I think Councillor Gruen asked about whether the top floor was accommodation, and I confirmed it was, and he queried whether it had ground sort of floor to ceiling windows. And you could just see in that top bay study that how the floor level is, how do I call it? This one. Yeah. So here you can see how the kind of the floor level is dropped. So although it's glazed, it's not a kind of full floor to ceiling.
Oh, I see. It goes below the window bottom.
Yes.
Yeah. That wasn't very well expressed, was it?
Okay, so amenity space is provided in a roof terrace at first floor level, which has seating, planting, social spaces, hard surfaced areas. And then this just shows the main entrance to the student accommodation on the corner of the hedgerow and King Charles Street, and the road as it goes along King Charles Street. And here's a view looking south down Lands Lane, and you can see how the scale's been managed and how it responds to the different character of Lands Lane, which is different from the formality of the hedgerow. So for example, you can see that the scale of the shop fronts as it turns the corner step down, but features like the decorative motifs follow through. So it's got more of a human scale as it moves along Lands Lane. So block B, a different tone of brick, a very similar architectural language, but some differences. So there's brick banding at ground floor level, and that's extended up, framing the windows in sort of sets of windows. There's a shallow arch to the shop front, and then some details which are picked up at the top floor and string courses going through. And so it's part of the response to the panel feedback and the feedback from Historic England about the use of different materials and a differentiation in the architectural approach. And again, just some more the elevation drawings showing those ground floor facades. Amenity space again is provided in a courtyard, and you can see that, yeah, I was going to say we've accommodated 2 disabled parking bays within the ground floor of building B. But again, you've got active ground floor frontages which will frame the new streets. And again, more bay studies which show a slightly different approach to the window treatments and the shop front. And again, amenity space within a courtyard, first floor courtyard. So then block C, different brick again. We've got a repeat of the banding at ground floor level, but this time there's a sort of a decorative soldier course running along the top. You've got rusticated raised brickwork, but just framing individual windows, and then decorative motif along the base of the first floor windows. And then a sort of 2 simple arches for the shop fronts, which again is picked up in the top floor windows. And then on the elevation drawings, you can see where the buildings abut adjacent buildings. So the NCP car park and also the premises on to the south at Lands Lane. So you can just see the outline of the buildings on the southern elevation. This time the outside space is at ground floor level, so it's more of a green space with paths through, places to dwell, and planting and trees. It's just an image of one of the bridge links. And then in terms of the landscaping, there's 2 new streets proposed. Victoria Arcade in the north is the wider of the 2 streets at approximately 12 metres, and will be a pedestrianised space with central larger species trees in large beds along the middle, a level access along the north and the south, a clear building edge for those who need to use the building as a tapping line. And the level change is accommodated within a collection of steps and ramps in the centre of the street. So the landscape design is impacted by ongoing discussions with highways, and potentially, well, this area is to change, and the tree will be lost, and it'll become a turning head to allow vehicles to turn around. So King Charles Croft, the southernmost narrower street at 8.5 metres wide, which has a role as part of a servicing route. So it's open for deliveries at certain hours of the day, primarily in the mornings. It'll be offered for adoption. And the larger planters that are currently shown along the north are to be removed and replaced with a row of bollards to provide sufficient space for pedestrians to access when the route's available for deliveries. And again, some of the technical details are still being worked through. Some precedent images of the street furniture and planting. And this plan just shows how some of those the impact of some of those changes. So you can see the potential turning head here at the western extent of the Victoria Arcade, and then the row of bollards. So this plan just shows the entrance to the student accommodation in the northwest corner, and that commercial ground floor accommodation, which is indicatively configured in 8 units. So although there's a net loss of retail floor space from within the core, there's a net gain in active shopping frontages. And the ground floor also accommodates refuse, storage, cycle storage plant, changing facilities, and those 2 car parking bays within the northwest corner of Block B. And the developers identified a unit at the south of Block A, so a small unit, 100 square metres, that would be potentially available for community or third sector users, which would be the subject of a condition and responds directly to feedback from panel. This gives a flavour of the internal amenity space that will be available for the students, which is predominantly at first floor level with study spaces, gym, lounge, games areas, laundry facilities. And then in terms of the accommodation, it's a mix of studios and cluster flats, so 4, 5 and 6 bedroom cluster flats. And it's approximately 37% is flats and 63% is studio accommodation. And there's just an illustration of a typical room layout with a double bed, storage space, study area, ensuite, and it complies with the emerging guidance in our SPD. So just in terms of sustainability, the developer did look at conversion of the existing building in the first instance, but due to the high floor to ceiling heights and the very deep floor plates and the lack of windows on the outside, it was deemed to be unviable. But they've demonstrated that the proposal has future adaptability to other uses should demand change and demand for student accommodation falls away. So the majority of internal walls are non-load bearing. Bathrooms are provided in a pod, so easy to remove. And the building plan depth is below 50 metres and you've got daylight to both sides. So adaptable to other uses. And there is also an opportunity to have the buildings operating individually. So you could have 3 separate buildings. They've all got staircores and lifts in each building. They're tagged in BREEAM Excellent and have utilised passive design measures, energy efficiency measures, and the use of low carbon technologies. So just before I conclude, I have got a couple of updates to report. So in the report, I refer to an objection from Yorkshire Water due to the potential for proposed trees along Lands Lane impacting on a sewer and a water main. But the applicants engaged directly with Yorkshire Water and we've had an email confirming that they're intending to withdraw their objection, but they're awaiting a formal reconsultation request. And we've had 2 late objections to the application. So one from somebody who's employed with the council but is emailing in a personal capacity relating to the loss of a changing places toilet facility within the core. And because what's being re-provided is a collection of shops rather than a shopping centre per se, it doesn't meet the threshold within building regulations to provide a changing places toilet facility. However, the developers offered to retain the equipment from the changing places toilet facility and offer it to the council so that it could be relocated within the city centre or within the city, subject to identifying a suitable location. And then the second objection is from the landlord of the adjoining buildings on Lands Lane. And it's a follow-up to an initial objection that we received. And it is on the basis that there have been procedural errors with the application, that there'll be potential disruption to their business during construction and they want to review the measures designed to protect their building both structurally and operationally. And then stressing the importance of their right to access Lands Lane and gain access to some undercroft car parking and for refuse collection. So the application has been publicised in accordance with statutory requirements. So we don't consider there are procedural errors. And then the other matters that, although I think the parameters of the construction management plan are intended to be agreed before we determine the application, but generally matters that are dealt with outside of the planning process. And the rest of the representations are addressed in the report. So just to conclude, there are outstanding highways matters which are subject to ongoing discussions, but we're proposing that we resolve those before determining the planning application, and we're seeking authority to resolve them under delegated powers. So in conclusion, it's considered to be a positive opportunity to reimagine an underused shopping centre at the heart of the city's prime shopping area and a key site. The approach is to be, I think it's of a good quality, strong design led within a conservation area, and overall we feel it enhances the conservation area and the setting of nearby listed buildings. So it's brought to panel with a recommendation to defer and delegate for approval, subject to resolving the outstanding technical highway matters and the completion of a section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. We do have Michelle Davies and her team here as the agent. So again, if we need any questions from members, we can call them forward. Also, Phil. Sorry, and we have Phil, of course. Oh, and thank you for getting the signs off of Mike's carpeting armory. Well done. It only took about 8 years, but never mind. Myself. Okay. Questions from members, please.
And we're going to look at the panels.
Oh, yeah.
I had a question about the materials. Shall I ask it now and then we can think about it while we're looking at them?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, well, from a design perspective, I think it really works being stepped up in colour, the three buildings being stepped up in colour. I think it does just aligns with your eyes. The difference between the two panels on the right is not as different as I expected it would be. That would be my observation, and perhaps we could look at it first and then ask for a response to that question.
Okay, members, can we resume? Again, there are no objectors, so questions to officers, and we could bring forward, I've already said it, haven't I? Michelle Davies on the team, so if we need it, so it's entirely up to you. Over to you. Questions? Katie, please. Sorry, yes, do.
Just the question I asked earlier about the colour of the materials in the two right-hand panels.
Yeah, we were reflecting that it's not just a different material, but it's how it's applied to the buildings that's different. So it will appear different in real life, but notwithstanding that, there is we will be controlling the materials by conditions. So there's an option to revisit those, and Phil Ward was reflecting that we'd like to look at those on site to make sure we get the material choice correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask about the lower street? I've forgotten what name it's been given, where the bollards have been put on instead of planters. Will there be any planting on that street at all? Is the first one. The second one is Yorkshire Water's objection about trees on Land Lane. Will those trees remain? Or have they removed the objection because the trees are no longer going to be there? And then the third one is about the changing places toilet facility. Has any thought been given to where that could be? You said that it's no longer a requirement because it's not a shopping centre. Does that mean it's not possible for it to stay on the same site? Thank you.
With regard to your question about the lower street, it's at this moment, it's unlikely that there will be any planting on that street just because of the constrained width and the need to accommodate routes for pedestrians and the service vehicles and the width of that's proposed.
Thank you. So the proposed trees on Lands Lane, which are through the off-site highway works, the proposal is that through the use of root barriers, they can make sure that the tree roots don't interfere with the Yorkshire Water assets below. So the intention is that they're retained. I think there's 3 trees proposed on Lands Lane, which is it's intended that they remain. And then the changing places toilet facility. So they need to be within a publicly accessible location. So it wouldn't, the matter was raised by the access officer at an early point, but it wouldn't be appropriate to, or it's not being accommodated within one of the shops within the ground floor, but other locations that we've considered are potentially within council buildings. So maybe the art gallery or the market. So we'll have to, the intention is to try and look for an alternative location, just to relocate the equipment, but it's not being provided on site.
Well, only to say that it's a serious consideration needs to be given to that, doesn't it? And I would suggest that somewhere such as a market is not acceptable. It's too far away. I think we ought to look at where it is now and accommodating it as close as possible.
I think that's right. I think maybe, are you coming in, please?
Just to be absolutely clear, that there's not been advanced discussions on where this will go. I think you're as much a part of the conversation, so it's helpful to have those comments in that we look at this area. I think the important thing is the developer is quite happy to retain that for us. It's theirs, it's not ours. They're happy to give that over retain that for us. And it's it's an ongoing dialogue between the council and the developer. I'm sure with a bit of will, we can find an appropriate location for it. Thank you.
I think that's reassuring, and certainly members were nodding around the table. So obviously there's a desire to see it located somewhere as close as possible to its current site. Councillor Groon, did I see your hand?
I was only coming in to say that I agree and to say, could we actively ask if that can be reconsidered again? I think Daljit's addressed that.
Yeah. Any more questions? Kaylee, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think first of all, it's really impressive that the applicant managed to get some communication opened up with Yorkshire Water, so well done on that. What I'd like to ask about is the community space. Do we know what kind of shape that's going to take yet? And is it going to be conditioned?
Can you answer that, Ash? Yep, please.
Sorry, yeah, the developers identified a unit which is in the southwest corner of Block A, and it's 100 square metres. And the intention is that it'd be a sort of a shell, but would be offered, and we will. We need to build in some flexibility in the event that a third sector or community organisation can't be identified, because we don't want a vacant unit. So there'll be some flexibility in whether it's a community use or a commercial use. But yes, we will include an appropriately worded condition.
Okay, any more questions? Can we go on to comments then, please? Comments. Colin?
Well, I have to say I'm impressed by the idea behind this. I must be having a rush of blood to the head really this week. When I first read the papers, I thought to myself, oh, good heavens, what's going to happen with a huge, great student block and everything. But standing on site today and looking at the way the developers approached what is a fairly constrained site, and it's a site that is highly visible. And it's, as Steve's just said to me, it's really at the core of the shopping offer within Leeds. And so we could have had a huge, great, tall red brick block because that's what we get students in. But I think the developer's been sensible and innovative and looked at this and said, what can we do that reflects the current conservation area around there, doesn't try to mimic it, but reflects it. And what can we do to get a commercially viable operation on site? Now, maintaining the open usage at ground floor level is what we want. We could argue about whether there's too many students or not, and I'm sure somebody will say that, but you know, we can't book the market if that's what the market is. That's what we should accept. And I think, having asked a few questions this morning on the site visit, I am confident that they can manage the student movements. And it seems to me, well, if you look at the existing building, it's of its time, and I think its time's passed. And so it's one of those buildings that's not doing much for the head row at the moment. And I think this one may, well, I think it will lift that entrance down into Lands Lane and that into the pedestrian area. And I think it's a very positive set of proposals. And you may find this strange, Chair, but for the second time today, I'm prepared to move that we accept the officer's recommendation.
I'm happy you do that, Councillor Campbell, although I was listening very carefully to your comments. It's of its time and its time has passed. I have to confess, I was on the original planning application and moved that, so maybe that's appropriate too. Dan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was a great fan of the original Schofield Centre. In fact, it's had one of our original food courts with the amazing escalator that never seemed to finish, and the bloke holding balloons that lit up as the clock. And it was of its time, and it was groundbreaking at the time. Unfortunately, the core does not, as it is, have that same reputation, and its time has most certainly passed. I think this is a really good application. I always have concern about ever more student accommodation, and in many ways I call it that, but I share your view on this. I think this is a good way of delivering it. I think this is a really top-notch application. I think it adds a huge amount to the city centre. It's much smarter. It will lift that bit of the city, and the sooner it's there, the better. So I'm delighted to second, and I'm conscious that we want to break a world record for having 3 applications and actually managing to get out while it's still light outside. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Groon?
I really like this application. It's grown on me actually from the site visit as the days progressed. I think the design is very appropriate and fits in with the hedgerow culture very well indeed. The idea of the shopping streets going through, the visual appearance, the materials, I just think it comes together as a really good application. We're so used to looking at CGIs, aren't we? And I must say, I've only ever seen one building that looked exactly like the CGI when it was built out, and that was 1 Kirkstall Forge. It looks exactly like the CGI that was presented at the plans panel meeting. I hope this is the second one that looks exactly like the CGI, because I would like a building like that on the hedgerow. So just one comment about the concern about the protection of adjacent buildings while the building is going on. I do share that concern, and I think I noticed on site this morning that one of the shops, which is one of the adjacent shops which is nearest to the proposed building is having a refurb at the moment, and obviously is wanting to promote that newness. I would be concerned if construction and demolition was going on that close to where my new shop was. So I hope thought will be given to that in advance. But I absolutely approve of this plan.
Thank you. Katie.
Thank you. From a sustainability perspective, it's always a shame to watch the plans for a demolition of a building. And one of the questions I initially had before coming along today was, what are we doing to make sure that we're not going to be doing the same again in the near future? And so I feel really reassured from the information that has been shared with us about the potential flexibility of use. And I think that's really important, that we're looking at what's there now in terms of a demand. But if that changes, I do feel reassured that the use of the building can change, and therefore we're not going to be in a situation that we are currently in. So I think that's a really important point.
Thank you, Katie. Asghar, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I do welcome this application. It's going to be a remarkable application, and just to follow on from Councillor Corwin, I remember Schofield as an 11-year-old boy who came to Leeds, first time in Leeds, and visited the Schofield with my uncle, and I was really impressed. Somebody came from far away, and so the shops are really busy, buzzing, escalators going up and down, so that was new to me. But however, coming back to this application, by looking at the design and the material and the surrounding street as well, it will really blend in really nicely. And and I'm happy to move it as well, Chair. If no one wants to move it.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree. It's a really good quality development, and well done to the applicants putting it together. I do have to say though quickly. So inner city residents often complain about the amount of purpose-built student accommodation that comes forward in the city centre, not just in my ward but in the surrounding wards as well. So I really do hope that the applicant follows through with the community space that has been put forward in the application, and make sure that it's accessible and usable by all residents in the inner area to show that not all developers are just wanting to scrape money out of people and want to better the area that they're developing as well. Thank you.
For that, all fine. I'm sure you've all taken your happy pills today, or the quality of the developments before us has been responsible for all this outburst of joy and happiness. And I guess I have to thank the applicants for that. I think we've had some remarkable schemes before us today, and maybe you didn't take your happy pills. Just by a word of explanation, I have to say that although I was part of the panel, I opposed the red brick because we were going through a battle within our group at the time with the former chair. And me and my good friend Fabian Hamilton was regarded as the young Turks who come on and we shouldn't be changing anything. He did have his revenge on me the year after. He managed to have me kicked off for 1 year, but only 1 year. I'm very persistent. So please don't blame me for the old scheme. I can assure you I opposed that at the time. It's been moved by Councillor Campbell, the new rejuvenated Councillor Campbell, and Councillor Khan. So all those in favour, please show. Oh, wow. Thank you. That is passed unanimously. This is clearly a world record, or a record for Leeds at least. Okay. Can I close the meeting and thank you all for your attendance and thank you all for your wonderful comments.